let's talk a little bit about community, about this. It's been such a weird year because our communities have moved online. And in some ways, here we are right now on a Tuesday, and we're in all these different places and we're together on Zoom. And so this is a different kind of community that we didn't know before. But then some of our community that we've had our whole lives feels fractured or has just sort of disappeared in some ways or morphed because of the pandemic. Like what are you noticing about community in this time period?
I think that it's been interesting to see. I'm trying to think how to say this. There have been these communities that I was always a part of, like my church, for example, or even at work, the people that I would normally see on a regular basis, who, when we moved everything online, we've actually at ACU been back in person for the whole year with mask and social distancing and things like that. But I still didn't see people, except the people in my building. We weren't having lunches together and coffees. And so I do feel like right now our communities in some ways are very fragmented. Now there's other communities. So I'm thinking about a particular, like my family, who all were together during quarantine at certain times. And our oldest daughter goes to College of Michigan. So she was suddenly back with us and hasn't been with us since she went off to college 4 years ago. And we had a lot of community and connection that we didn't have before. So it's interesting because I think some of my communities are more fragmented, are not as strongly connected, while others maybe are more connected, which is an interesting situation to kind of be in. And I do think Amy, your comment about acknowledging that you do feel maybe some disconnect and maybe even some, I'm trying to think of the word you use, fracturing, but also maybe hostility within some of your own communities. I think we need for ourselves acknowledge that, and maybe even within like our families, if we had people on different side of the political spectrum or believing different things about COVID, for example, you might have some tension and some really intense disengagement going on in some of your communities because of those things that the race relations issues. All of those things have led to maybe not discussions, but disconnection, that because we haven't been talking with each other about those differences.
Yeah, I've been exactly that. I've been thinking so much about, but my church has not been meeting in person. We've been meeting virtually. And this was earlier in the pandemic. I realized how kind of contentious our, in the Presbyterian Church, we call it the session being kind of our council, our elders have been. And it occurred to me there's so often the meeting before the meeting when we're in the person. Like there's the meeting when we're walking into the car, there's the meeting when we're like getting our coffee and kind of chatting. And so some of that lubricates our decision making. And so without that, I really felt a shift in community. So it's all these little things that I think I took for granted. And I'm like, we need some more parking lot conversations, because we were really missing that. We had no way to really have those. So along those lines, I think sometimes I have been, a friend of mine has started these beloved community groups where we where we have small groups and talk about issues and anti-racism. And so many people in the group were grieving fractured relationships because of the election or because of social injustice or just feeling these different things and only being able to really talk about them online and not in person. And so one of the women in the group was grieving a 35-year friendship that she's like, we've been best friends for 35 years. And this is just, our relationship has disintegrated, like where we're trading memes online, you know, like she's like, I don't even know this relationship anymore. But I think that it's just, it's it's hard to be, and without those little things that we take for granted. But at the same time, I had the funny experience of I had lunch with a friend, and she was like, I don't think we've ever met in person. And it was so odd. I was like, until today, I mean, until that day, because we had met through the ordination process, and we'd like been calling and emailing and just texting, and have become great friends over the pandemic. And where it occurred to her, she was like, I did not realize you were that short. I'm not, I'm 4'11". And she was like, I don't know, like on Zoom and like everywhere, you seem so much taller. And so it was just so hilarious that I really cultivated this really intense friendship with someone and we hadn't met and we live probably a mile and a half from each other, but we hadn't because it had been in pandemic time. So it's like all of these interesting ways of staying in community and being and building community, and real community. You know, I think for like we've always had that idea that we don't build real community online, and you know, and all these things. And so we're seeing how, I mean, we've seen for a long time that that's not true, but I think we've really learned like the church is not the building. You know, things get done remotely in different ways, but then there are also these little ways that that human interactions happen that we don't get to do online. And so figuring all those things out, and how to stay in relationship when things are uncomfortable. And I just think societally it's hard for, I mean, we're not good at that. And so we're in the midst of figuring out how to really do that.